The crowd laughed, glasses clinking, the chandelier sparkling above. A hush suddenly fell as the birthday cake rolled in. All eyes turned, whispers spreading like wildfire. 30 years of silence, 30 years of humiliation. And tonight, the truth would explode like fire in a cathedral. Arav stood at the edge of the room, hidden in the shadows. Calm, composed, eyes scanning the crowd. No one noticed him, not even his parents. "Oh, Arav, we've got a little surprise for you tonight. Something very special," his mother said, smiling falsely. "DNA results! Imagine the shock on your face when you're not who you think you are," his father added, chuckling, smug and triumphant. The crowd gasped, whispers filling the air. Arav's jaw tightened. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. A predator patiently circling its prey. They had laughed at him for 30 years, called him failures, told him he was nothing. Tonight everything changes, but not in the way they imagine. His mother opened the envelope with trembling hands, scanning the results. Her eyes widened in horror. She looked around, searching for reassurance, but found none. Arav's gaze remained icy and sharp, unwavering. "They never saw me coming. They never imagined who was really in the crowd," he whispered to himself, a chill in his voice. At the back of the room, a shadowed figure waited, hands folded, calm and unreadable. Arav's eyes met theirs, a subtle nod exchanged. The plan was set. In the midst of humiliation, he had allies' secrets, and a strategy no one could have guessed. The music shifted to a slow, suspenseful rhythm. Guests murmured, oblivious to the storm about to descend. 30 years, every insult, every betrayal. He had waited for this moment. And tonight they would finally see him. His hands clenched briefly, then relaxed, every movement precise, deliberate, calculated. Some revenge is loud, some revenge is silent, some is perfectly orchestrated. The crowd continued their chatter, completely unaware that the night was about to change forever. The chatter in the room carried on, unaware that every word was being measured, catalogued, turned into ammunition. Arav moved slowly through the crowd, a ghost among the oblivious, smiling faces. He shook hands, nodded politely, laughed at jokes he hadn't heard, while his mind replayed the years of insults and hidden humiliations. His parents stood at the center, radiating arrogance. They were proud of themselves, unaware of the storm in his eyes. The envelope with the DNA results lay unopened on the table between them, a symbol of their cruelty, their misplaced confidence. Arav's gaze fell on the crowd. Among them, a few faces stirred something deep inside him, faces he had trained to recognize, allies who had quietly helped him, friends who had stood in the shadows, watching, waiting. They had been loyal, patient, unbroken. Their presence was subtle, almost invisible, yet unmistakably powerful. He walked closer to the cake. Every step deliberate, measured. His parents noticed his approach and smiled condescendingly. They did not know that he carried in his mind the blueprint of their downfall. Every insult they had hurled, every dismissive glance they had given him, every humiliating birthday had been stored like a code. Tonight that code would be decrypted. He reached the table. The envelope gleamed under the chandelier lights. His mother's eyes locked on his, a mixture of triumph and terror forming as she anticipated the reveal. Arav's hand hovered above the envelope. He could feel the tension tighten the room, each breath synchronized with the quiet pulse of his vengeance. Slowly, he allowed himself a smile. Not the nervous, forced smile of the past, but the calm, quiet confidence of a man who had been underestimated his entire life. He tore the envelope open and glanced at the contents. The room went still. He did not flinch, he did not cry, he did not beg, he only smiled. "Oh," his mother whispered almost inaudibly. How is this possible?" Arav's lips barely moved as he spoke, but his words cut sharper than any knife. "You think you know me, but you only knew the shadow I let you see. You never expected the light hiding behind it." The crowd murmured. Some leaned in, sensing the tension, feeling the undercurrent of danger. His father's confident smirk faltered, the first crack in his armor. Arav's eyes scanned him, and in that split second, the father realized the magnitude of the storm he had invited into his own home. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, made me doubt myself, made me believe I was nothing." Arav continued, voice low, controlled. "And for 30 years I pretended to be small, weak, obedient, but tonight that act ends." He stepped back, and from the shadows, the allies he had noted earlier began to emerge. Not in a threatening way, but in a subtle, undeniable presence. Friends, witnesses, people who had been overlooked by his parents, all connected silently, a network of quiet power. Each person's presence was a statement. Arav was not alone, and he had support in ways they could not comprehend. The mother's hand shook. "Arav, I don't understand." "You will," he said softly. "Everything you ever wanted to hide, every secret you thought buried, will be illuminated tonight. And you will see I am not the mistake you always claimed I was. I am the reckoning you never prepared for." A chill swept the room. The guests whispered nervously, sensing the gravity, the palpable shift. They had come for a celebration and instead found themselves spectators to something far darker, far more powerful than any social gathering had prepared them for. Arav's mind flashed back to his childhood, the insults, the isolation, the endless comparisons, the whispered taunts behind closed doors. He remembered the parties where he had been ignored, the laughter at his expense, the feeling of being invisible yet painfully present. Those memories fueled him. They were no longer chains, they were fire, forging a new version of himself, cold, precise, unstoppable. 30 years, he said again, voice carrying now through the room. 30 years of patience, observation, learning, and now your time is up. His father stepped forward, attempting control, attempting to reclaim the narrative. Arav, you're overreacting. This is your birthday. You thought this was about a birthday. Arav interrupted, calm but lethal in his tone. No, this is about justice. This is about revealing the truth. This is about showing you that the child you humiliated, the man you underestimated, is finally in control. A subtle tension hung in the air, electric, almost visible. The guests shifted uncomfortably, the opulence of the room now a stage for a quiet, surgical dismantling of pride. Arav's allies began to subtly distribute documents, recordings, and photographs, evidence of years of deceit, betrayal, hidden schemes that his parents had believed would remain buried forever. The mother's face turned pale. The father's hands clenched into fists. Every lie, every manipulation, every whisper of shame was now exposed to the room. The crowd could see the truth, and with every revelation the parents' power, once absolute, began to crumble. Arav watched quietly, his expression serene, almost meditative. He did not gloat. He did not rush. He had learned long ago that patience was more powerful than rage. Revenge was not a scream, it was a slow, inevitable dawn. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, he signaled to one of his allies. A screen flickered to life, projecting faces, names, dates, evidence of the countless times his parents had humiliated him publicly and privately. The room fell silent, the air grew heavy, thick with disbelief and tension. You always wanted me to be small, Arav said, voice cutting through the silence. You wanted me to crumble, to obey, to vanish. But I waited, I learned. I planned, and now, he paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in. Now you see me. His parents sank into their seats, powerless, stripped of dignity. The crowd, shocked and awed, whispered among themselves. Some guests tried to intervene, some reached for excuses, but nothing could undo what had begun. Arav controlled the room not with anger, but with precision, intelligence, and an unshakable calm. And as the night continued, the whispers grew louder, but not against him, they were in his favor. Everyone in the room began to see the depth of his strength, the brilliance of his strategy, the inevitability of his revenge. He had been underestimated, overlooked, ignored, but never defeated. Tonight he had claimed what was his, not in rage, not in spectacle, but in cold, unstoppable, meticulous justice. The room was suffocating now, filled with tension that had nothing to do with celebration. Arav stood quietly, a calm storm at the center of a hurricane he had orchestrated. His parents slumped in their seats, faces pale, pride shattered, dignity shredded. The guests whispered, afraid to look directly, afraid to interrupt the invisible pulse of control radiating from him. He moved slowly, deliberately through the crowd. Each step measured, each glance precise. No sudden movements, no theatrics, just the quiet, undeniable presence of a man who had waited decades for this moment. Every insult he had suffered, every humiliation had been stored, processed, and weaponized. You always thought I was weak, he said, voice low, carrying across the room like a blade hidden in silk. You thought silence made me powerless. But silence is not weakness, silence is patience. Silence is strategy. Silence is power you never understood. The mother's hands trembled, clutching the remnants of the DNA envelope. Arav, please, we. Her voice cracked, desperation creeping in like a cold shadow. You think apologies can undo 30 years of pain? He asked, calm and merciless. You think words can erase the scars you left on me? No, you will see, you will feel, you will remember every word, every glance, every betrayal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. With a single press, a screen descended from the ceiling. Images flashed across it, old photographs of humiliation, video clips of his parents' subtle cruelty, recordings of lies, betrayals. Moments they had assumed he had forgotten. The crowd gasped. This is not a party, he said softly. This is a reckoning, and every person here will witness it. Gus leaned closer, unable to look away. The mother covered her mouth, shaking. The father's hands clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. Every revelation on the screen tore their carefully constructed world apart. Friends who had supported Arav quietly revealed themselves, business partners, long-lost relatives, people who had quietly helped him rise while they plotted his humiliation. And then the door opened. A figure entered, the final piece of the puzzle, someone no one expected. A face from the past, a shadow he had called upon to ensure the ultimate justice. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, anticipation mingling with fear. His parents froze, their faces turning to white masks. You thought you could humiliate me with lies, with DNA tests, with ridicule in front of everyone, Arav said, stepping forward. You thought no one would remember, no one would care. But here he is. The one you never considered. The figure approached, tall, imposing, calm. Recognition dawned in the parents' eyes, followed by panic. Their whispers were swallowed by the room, their faces betrayed their fear. The crowd sensed the danger before they even understood it. Arav's allies subtly moved closer, closing the invisible circle, isolating his parents in a web of exposure and truth. You see, Arav continued, voice steady. Revenge is not chaos, it is art, it is patience. It is the quiet accumulation of power until the moment of unveiling. The mother dropped the envelope, clutching her chest. The father's legs wobbled. Every lie, every betrayal, every instance of cruelty had been documented, exposed, and revealed in front of everyone. Their social status, carefully built over decades, was crumbling before their eyes. "I am not angry," Arav said, taking a step closer. "I am inevitable. And now you will feel what it is to be powerless, to be exposed, to be seen for exactly what you are: flawed, cruel, petty. You raised a child to obey, to crumble, and instead, you created a force you could never contain." The figure from the past revealed documents, proof of years of deception, financial manipulation, betrayals that the parents thought were invisible, secrets that would ruin reputations. The crowd whispered, some gasped, some stepped back, some reached for their phones. Every lie, every cruel act, every hidden betrayal was now public, undeniable. "You will not recover from this," Arav said. "Not tomorrow. Not ever. And you will remember this feeling every single day. The helplessness you inflicted upon me, multiplied infinitely upon yourselves." The parents fell silent, unable to speak. Their eyes darted between Arav and the figure beside him. Their pride, arrogance, and years of control had evaporated in an instant. The crowd, once cheering and laughing, now watched in awe. Arav's voice softened, almost reflective. "I waited 30 years. Every slight, every insult, every humiliation, I remembered them all. Every whisper, every laugh behind closed doors. And tonight you understand why silence can be the deadliest weapon of all." He walked to the center of the room, the crowd parting instinctively. Every eye followed him. The birthday celebration had vanished, replaced by a palpable atmosphere of power, fear, and revelation. His parents sat slumped, broken, exposed, their world destroyed not by fury but by cold, meticulous strategy. "And yet," he said, eyes gleaming, "this is not hatred. This is clarity. This is justice. This is the culmination of patience, intelligence, and restraint. You will never see me the same way again. You will never underestimate me again. You will never forget me." The figure beside him handed over the final proof, a document so damning that it would strip away the last vestige of social credibility they had clung to. The room went still, the whispers now replaced by stunned silence. Arav held the papers aloft, letting the weight of truth settle over the room like a suffocating fog. "You raised me to be weak. You humiliated me to feel powerful. But I have learned something essential," Arav said. "Power is not loud. Power is not violent. Power is patient, quiet, and intelligent. And tonight you have felt it." The guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Some avoided looking at his parents, some at Arav, but all felt the seismic shift in the room. No one clapped. No one laughed. The opulence of the celebration now felt grotesque, a stage for the quiet annihilation of arrogance and cruelty. Arav stepped back, letting the weight of the night sink in. He did not gloat, he did not laugh. He only stood calm, serene, untouchable. The storm had passed, and he remained, the eye of the hurricane, unshaken, powerful, victorious. His parents finally looked at him, the fear and disbelief etched permanently onto their faces. For 30 years they had thought they controlled him. For 30 years they had laughed, mocked, and humiliated. And for 30 years he had silently waited, bided his time, and perfected his plan. Tonight he had won, not with anger, but with inevitability. And as the guests slowly began to leave, whispers of awe and fear trailing behind, Arav finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Not of cruelty, not of triumph, but of justice, long awaited, precise, and unforgettable. For 30 years he had been underestimated, ignored, humiliated. And for 30 years he had waited. Tonight he had become everything they never expected, everything they never imagined, everything they could never defeat. The night ended not with chaos, not with violence, but with silence, the kind of silence that leaves scars deeper than any scream. A silence that speaks louder than any shout. A silence that says the quiet are never weak, the underestimated are never powerless, and the patient are always inevitable. The room had emptied slowly, but the air still carried the weight of what had just unfolded. Guests whispered in corners, eyes darting back at Arav as though fearing the quiet power radiating from him. He remained near the center, calm, observing. Not triumphant, not angry, just precise, as if the world itself had aligned to obey his plan. His parents sat frozen, clutching each other's hands in disbelief. The mother's tears had dried, leaving streaks across her pale face. The father's jaw was tight, his eyes darting, searching for some way to reclaim the dignity they had so carelessly destroyed. But there was nothing left to salvage. Arav stepped closer, his presence commanding yet understated. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice low and deliberate. "Do you see the consequences of every lie, every manipulation, every cruel whisper you thought would disappear into the past?" His father's lips moved, a feeble attempt at defiance, but no sound came. The mother shook her head, words failing her. Their power had evaporated, their control shattered by decades of patient observation and meticulous planning. "You spent 30 years thinking you were shaping me," Arav continued, "but in truth you were shaping the force that would one day undo you. Every insult, every humiliation, every condescending glance became a brick in the fortress of my patience. And tonight I claim what is mine, not out of anger, but inevitability." He walked slowly around the table, each step measured, controlled. The envelope with the DNA results had been set aside, but the weight of it lingered in the room like a ghost. Every guest who remained could feel it, the revelation of truth, of hidden realities, of betrayals long ignored. From the shadows, a quiet figure approached, the same one who had been in the crowd earlier. Calm, imposing, eyes sharp. Arav's glance met theirs, a silent exchange of understanding. This was no accident. Every alley, every hidden force had been positioned with care, ready to execute the final phase of his plan. Arav said, turning back to his parents. You taught me to hide my strength, to suppress my anger, to appear weak. But silence is not weakness. Silence is a weapon, and now, that weapon has struck with precision. The mother tried to speak again, but her voice was trembling, ineffective. Her hands twisted in her lap, searching for control, for reassurance, for some way to undo the devastation. The father leaned forward, desperation overtaking pride. Arav, you will not speak, he interrupted, calm yet commanding. Every word you utter now will only reveal more of your failure. You see, I am no longer a child to be shaped. I am no longer the shadow you overlooked. I am the reckoning you created and failed to anticipate. The room seemed to shrink around him, every guest acutely aware of the invisible force emanating from Arav. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threats. The power was in his composure, in the deliberate calm, in the knowledge that everything was under control. Do you remember my 10th birthday? He asked quietly, almost a whisper. You humiliated me in front of family, called me a disappointment, told me I would never succeed. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment you could. You chipped away at me, and for 30 years I remembered. I waited, I learned. The father's hands trembled, the first sign of cracking composure. The mother's eyes filled with fear as memories she had long hoped would be buried resurfaced in vivid detail. Arav's voice carried through the silence, each word deliberate, each syllable a calculated strike. But patience, he continued, is not simply waiting. Patience is preparation. Patience is observing, calculating, and executing with precision. And tonight you are the subjects of that execution. From his pocket, he retrieved a second envelope, heavier this time. He held it out, letting the weight of its contents draw the attention of every remaining guest. Inside this envelope are truths you never expected to see revealed. Names, actions, secrets. All of the things you believed would stay hidden now laid bare, and the world is watching. The guests leaned closer, some gasping, some whispering. The father's face was pale, sweat forming at his temple. The mother clutched her chest, fear and disbelief intertwining. They had lived their lives assuming control, assuming invisibility, assuming power. And now, all assumptions had been stripped away. Arav's calmness did not waver. He handed the envelope to the shadowed figure beside him, who opened it and began to distribute its contents subtly to selected guests. Faces turned, expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Friends, colleagues, distant relatives, all were implicated in the web of truths revealed. The parents' social empire was crumbling silently, irreversibly. You have underestimated me for decades, Arav said, voice soft but cutting. You believed that humiliation would make me small, that lies would make me obedient, that silence would make me weak. But I am not weak. I am not small, I am not silent anymore. I am inevitable. The crowd was no longer just spectators, they were participants in witnessing the dismantling of arrogance and cruelty. Guests whispered behind their hands, eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. The mother's hands were shaking uncontrollably. The father's shoulders slumped, their world, carefully curated for decades, was disintegrating under the weight of truth. You always thought control was power, Arav said. You were wrong. Control is fragile. Power is earned, and I have earned it. He stepped forward again, calm, deliberate. Tonight is not about revenge in the way you think. It is about truth, justice, clarity. You see, true power does not scream. True power waits. True power observes. True power delivers inevitability. The guests murmured in awe, some recording discreetly, others simply watching, paralyzed. Every detail of Arav's plan, every act of patience and precision had been executed flawlessly. His parents' downfall was not violent, not chaotic, it was surgical, perfect, irreversible. Arav allowed himself a slow breath, the weight of 30 years of preparation finally manifesting in this one moment. He looked at his parents, their faces masks of shock, fear, and disbelief. You raised me to obey, to fail, to disappear. But instead, you raised a force you never imagined, a presence you could never control, a reckoning you could never escape. He stepped back, letting the gravity of the moment settle over the room. The guests, silent, watched as the parents sank into their chairs, powerless, defeated, exposed. The DNA results, the evidence, the revelations, all had done what words and anger never could. They had removed the illusion of power from those who had abused it. And now, Arav said quietly, almost to himself, I am free. Free from the shadows of your cruelty. Free from the lies, the ridicule, the humiliation. Free to live as I was always meant to. And you will carry this weight forever. The room, once filled with celebration, now held a different energy, heavy, tense, permanent. The whispers continued, the awe lingering. Guests departed quietly, some still glancing back, haunted by the presence of a man who had transformed decades of pain into unstoppable force. Arav remained still, calm, serene, untouchable. His parents looked up once more. Desperation in their eyes, but he did not speak. He had no words left for them. Their reckoning had been delivered. Justice, patient and precise, had been served. And as the final guests left, the room ebbed tide of laughter and light. A profound silence settled. It was not empty, not meaningless. It carried the weight of inevitability, the quiet, enduring presence of a man who had been underestimated, mocked, and humiliated, yet had emerged not broken. 30 years of preparation, 30 years of silent observation, 30 years of strategic patience, all culminated in this night. And as he finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, Arav knew one undeniable truth: the underestimated are never powerless. The patient are never weak, and the quiet are always inevitable. The house was silent now, stripped of pretense. The last of the guests had departed, leaving only echoes of whispered shock and awe. The walls, once gleaming with the trappings of celebration, now seemed to reflect the weight of truth laid bare. Arav stood alone for a moment, letting the silence settle, savoring the calm that follows meticulous precision. His parents remained slumped in the center of the room, too exhausted, too broken to move. The mother's lips quivered, the father's eyes were hollow with disbelief. They had been confident, arrogant, untouchable. And now, in the span of a single night, all of that had been dismantled, not with rage, not with shouting, but with clarity, patience, and an unwavering will that they could never anticipate. Arav walked slowly toward them, every step deliberate, every movement calm, almost serene. His gaze was not filled with hatred, there was no need. Hatred is impulsive. It burns and consumes its bearer. He had learned long ago that true power lies in control, in quiet inevitability. "You raised me to obey, to crumble, to vanish," he said softly, voice carrying the weight of 30 years of suffering. "You humiliated me, ignored me, belittled me. And for 30 years I endured silently, learning, observing. Tonight you see the result." The mother tried to speak, a feeble attempt to regain control, but her voice faltered. "Arav, we didn't know we." He shook his head gently, almost pitying. "You never needed to know. That was the beauty of your arrogance. You believed ignorance would protect you. You thought silence would make me weak, but the quiet are never powerless. The underestimated are always capable of something unimaginable." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the DNA results once more. The paper crumpled slightly from handling, a tangible symbol of all the years of hidden manipulation. He held it aloft. This was your attempt to humiliate me tonight, a final act of control, and yet it became the instrument of your undoing." The father's shoulders slumped further. "We never thought. You never think?" Arav interrupted. "You act, you scheme, you manipulate. But you never think beyond the present. You never accounted for patience, for intelligence, for inevitability. Every insult you hurled, every word meant to diminish me, only sharpened my mind, hardened my resolve, and prepared me for this night." A quiet knock came at the door. Arav did not flinch. He had anticipated every moment. The shadowed figure from earlier stepped inside, holding a folder thick with documents, evidence of corruption, deceit, financial manipulation, and hidden betrayals. It was a culmination of years of research, careful planning, and alliances forged in silence. He motioned for the figure to place the folder on the table. "This," he said, gesturing toward the papers, "is more than just truth. It is inevitability. It is the culmination of everything you tried to hide, exposed in front of those who now know exactly who you are." The mother's hands trembled. She reached for the folder, but Arav lifted his hand, stopping her. "No," he said softly but firmly, "you will not touch it. You will not intervene. You will watch quietly as the consequences of your arrogance unfold. Power is not in what you possess, but in what you cannot control." He allowed the room to breathe, letting the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. The air was thick with tension, the kind that lingers after a storm passes but leaves devastation in its wake. The parents realized the finality of the moment. They had nothing left. No defenses, no allies, no illusions. The child they had humiliated had become a force beyond their comprehension. "I spent 30 years preparing." Arav continued, pacing slowly, each word deliberate. 30 years observing, analyzing, and building strength, and all of it led to this night. Every whispered insult, every laugh behind my back, every moment you thought I was insignificant, all of it contributed to the power I now wield. He paused, looking at his parents with eyes that were calm, unyielding, unshakable. "And now," he said, "you will live with the knowledge that every humiliation you inflicted, every cruel word, every attempt to diminish me, has only made me unstoppable. And you will never underestimate me again." The mother began to sob quietly. The father's eyes darted around, searching for a way out, but the walls of their carefully constructed life had collapsed, the foundation of lies and control stripped away. Arav did not speak again for a long moment's silence. Once his enemy had become his instrument of justice. Finally, he reached the edge of the room, placing a hand on the folder. "This is not about revenge in the way you imagine. Revenge is impulsive, chaotic. What I have delivered is far more precise. It is exposure. It is truth, it is inevitability. And it is yours to bear for the rest of your lives." He turned, looking at the empty room, at the few remaining witnesses whose eyes reflected awe, fear, and understanding. "Some think that power lies in shouting and anger, in chaos. They are wrong. True power is quiet. True power is patient. True power is inevitable." His mother's sobs echoed in the stillness. His father slumped further, finally understanding that all the lessons he thought he taught, all the control he believed he held, had been an illusion. Arav had never been their victim. He had always been their reckoning, quietly waiting, observing, and calculating. You will live with this truth, he said softly, voice carrying through the room like a gentle but lethal wind. And you will remember every day that I am not the child you humiliated. I am the force you never considered, the quiet you never understood, and the inevitability you can never escape. A final hush settled over the room. The chaos of celebration, the laughter, the smug confidence of parents who believed themselves untouchable, had been replaced by something heavier, deeper, permanent. A silence that carried the weight of justice, the inevitability of truth, and the quiet power of a man who had been underestimated for 30 years. Arav stepped to the door, pausing to look back one last time. I forgive you, he said softly. Not because you deserve it, but because your punishment is simply to live with the consequences of your choices. You will remember this night forever, not because of anger, but because truth is relentless and patience is unforgiving. He walked out into the night calm, composed, unstoppable. The moonlight reflected off his face, highlighting eyes that had seen suffering, patience, and transformation. The storm of justice was complete. The quiet, underestimated, humiliated man had become the ultimate reckoning. Behind him the room remained silent, a monument to the careful orchestration of truth, patience, and inevitability. The parents sat in a frozen tableau, stripped of arrogance, pride, an illusion. Every whispered lie, every cruel act, every act of humiliation had been repaid, not with rage but with precision, intelligence, and patience. Arav's footsteps echoed in the hall as he exited the house, leaving the past behind, leaving nothing but truth and inevitability in his wake. The world had witnessed a quiet revolution, a transformation from victim to force, from shadow to storm. And though the night was still, the power he had claimed would echo forever, a silent reminder that the underestimated are never powerless, the patient are never weak, and the quiet are always inevitable. As he disappeared into the night, a final thought settled in his mind. 30 years of patience, 30 years of endurance, 30 years of careful calculation had led to this moment. And now, at last, he was free, free from humiliation, free from fear, free from the chains of their arrogance, free to be unstoppable.